The NHL preseason continuing to be underway, but now the AHL in their official preseason as training camps continue. We're going to be talking Tucson Roadrunners today. Brett Fera of the Arizona Daily Star will be joining us on today's episode of Locked On Coyotes.
You're Locked On Coyotes, your daily podcast on the Arizona Coyotes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Robyn Leano, joined by Carl Pavlik, Brett Fera of the Arizona Daily Star, joining us to discuss Tucson Roadrunners hockey, their first preseason game tonight, against the Henderson Silver Knights. I couldn't be more excited because, well, I get to step in a hockey rink again. I'm not sure how you feel about that one, Brett.
Hopefully we get a little bit better seats than we had last year. You and I got to hang out a lot in the corner of the building where nobody was around except those trying to reach the restrooms walking by us.
That was a weird
protocols,
year.
Everybody. Amazing. No. Necessary, but interesting if nothing else.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of different things this year, we're hoping. Obviously, the team was different last year because, a lot of players were on the taxi squad for the Coyotes because, again, different protocols because you don't know if a player is going to get COVID. Here we are, back here again, and then, their head coach is back. They got players coming back, and, this is going to be a fun year.
It's a trip, if you look at this roster, it's really different from last year. But then it's also a lot the same. Their leading goal scorer is back. That's an interesting story we talked about before we started the show today. Mike Cocconi is now actually a part of the Coyotes, even though he was a Roadrunner last year on loan from Nashville. But the reality is it's a new era for this team. And with everything that's going on in Glendale and the Coyotes changes to see, I think I've got a story in the Star today that we outlined that 5 of the 10 longest tenured in terms of games played, longest tenured Roadrunners who were with the team at some point last year, gone this offseason. All 3 of the club's top 3 all-time goal scorers gone this offseason. So it is absolutely a new look. But then, like you had mentioned, Jay Verity back behind the bench is kind of thrown back to the before times, as we say about not just COVID, but even in hockey sets. His last day in the rink, last time he talked to any media, did anything in Tucson Arena, was that day in March when everything shut down. You were right next to me, I think, and we talked to him and Hudson Fasching. And first 2 people we got to talk to on Monday on the first day of practice at Tucson Arena, Hudson Fasching and Jay Verity. So kind of a weird bookend to 20 months in between for sure.
And, regarding that, that whole roster turnover, Carl, you and I were talking about the, in previous episodes, just, the Coyotes blowing things up. And we're seeing that in Tucson, too. Again, exactly how different this is going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think I and a lot of Coyotes fans pay attention to, the larger NHL roster moves. But the Coyotes were trading anyone who had value, and that includes some AHL guys, some prospects, and some veterans. And it'll be interesting to see how the Roadrunners kind of rebound and kind of what they lost versus what they've gained with the new round of guys that are going down.
Let's go with one of the ones based off the trades, and Brett and Carl. This is something that we were actually talking about right before we started recording, and that's the acquisition of Boko Imama from the Kings, trading away Tyler Steenbergen and Braden Burke, both of which who were pretty beloved players down here in Tucson, and now you get a physical guy in Boko Imama, not afraid to throw it down, as Brett, you and I saw that last series of this shortened season just this past year.
Yeah, Steenbergen and Burke, 2 of those 5 guys I mentioned in the top 10 in Roadrunners all-time games played that are gone. But they kind of did what every good team wants to do in theory, teams that want to be good, is they went out and got the guy that kind of messed with them a little bit and made them one of their own. And I as much as Braden Burke was a stalwart the last couple of years, specifically 2 years ago when he led the team in goals, was an all-star, all that stuff, he was not the same player last year, battling just ongoing injuries. And I think this is an upgrade. I think to get a physical player that they have not had, they have not had a player like that who will play virtually every minute unscathed, score goals. I mean, I think Imama scored 9 or 10 goals last year for Ontario. And just basically take the physicality into his own hands. That's a win for the Roadrunners for sure.
Yeah, and it's always nice when you get to take the guy who was being physical at you
Yep.
and then just turn him around on everyone else.
On that same team. I mean, that's an interdivision trade for the AHL. So kind of interesting dynamics there for what Los Angeles was thinking in that deal. They must just not seen a long-term opportunity for him, but I think he's a legit pickup, not just he's a little older. I mean, he's 25, so in the sense of his hockey tenure, career opportunities, those kind of things. But I would be shocked if he's not called up a couple times this season to Glendale in some capacity.
He's looked good in the preseason. I can definitely see him being a call up at one point if there's some sustained injuries.
Yeah, Imama was actually just put on waivers yesterday, based off the time of this recording. So this morning, should he clear, will be sent down to Tucson right away. And then again, it will be interesting seeing how that works out. A guy who is physical, and that was a discussion I kind of had with Craig Morgan. Now, like shortly after that trade went down, I'm like, what do you think went down here? And he's like, well, for one, there's going to be a lot of discussion going on the moment he enters that locker room, and a lot of like quote apologizing because it's like, yeah, we were on the wrong side of fights in the end, but we're now on the same team.
I asked a couple guys that, and I think they see it that they're hockey players. As much as it's annoying when they're on the ice, they know what their jobs are. So I actually would imagine they're kind of excited about that prospect and will laugh about it. I mean, we weren't there in the locker room, but that's my guess, is that they're going to sit there and look at it and be like, you remember that time you punked me? Yeah, let's go do that together to someone else. It's Dean Portman and what's his name from Mighty Ducks. That's what I'm imagining. I don't know who the sidekick is, but that's what I feel like with him out on the ice.
I mean, it happens enough in hockey. You have to figure that they're at least somewhat used to it. Unless, someone like crosses the line and does something crazy.
Right.
Like, you're always going to want to be like, yeah, that's a guy I want on my side.
Let's address some of the other. I'll just name like the other new guys that are coming in for the Runners this year, and exactly what makes it different. Matthias Maccelli, coming in for his first time. Liam Kirk. We're gonna see Vladislav Koyachinuk on the defense. Like, we're gonna have, again, as we said at the beginning, a very different team, and very highly touted players who have been talked about for years.
Yeah, I think what's most fascinating about this, and I'm not trying to get away from talking about the newcomers, but it's a collective thing, is you're looking at, I mean, depending what they do with Hayton up in Glendale, and if he sticks around, and he's such an interesting case because he's yet not really an NHL player, but he's played more NHL games than AHL games. Then you look at Maccelli, Kirk, Ben McCartney, who got a couple of games last year. I think he had 5 points in 4 games to end the season with Tucson after coming to Tucson from the WHL. Ryan McGregor, who I think at the point we're recording this is still with Glendale, which is kind of a shock too, to some extent. Unique, Hudson Fashing, Blake Spears, Imama, Cocconi. I mean, that's 11 guys right there, 10 guys. That's too many lines, if you really think about it. They're going to add a player or two. But the point is, like, they are 4 lines deep legitimately because of the newcomers. They have talent that's returning, and we can talk about those guys. But the newcomers, especially in Maccelli and Kirk, and I count McCartney in that mix too, let alone the super prospects and Unique, and if Hayton comes down to Tucson. They're 4 lines deep. And I think that helps the younger guys a lot because they're not going to necessarily, like last year, you had Unique and Hayton playing on the first line a lot, or playing on a 1B line, depending what Cocconi and Kevin Roy, who's now gone, were doing. So I think that it actually helps the overall, not just the fact they're so deep, but just the fact that these young guys don't have to star to develop and gain time. I mean, as much as everybody wants to see Liam Kirk make this fast track up there, he may need a season or two, and I think it's going to help him that he doesn't have to be the guy because there's 5 other the guys around him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You want the guys to go down to the AHL and get the minutes, but you don't want them overplayed because it's not going to help them.
Right.
Potentially lead to injuries. But yeah, the Roadrunners being deep is going to really help the Coyotes develop their younger guys.
And that's
Well,
the point of the American Hockey League. It's for development, and that's why they put Jay Verity back down there, because they knew what he was able to do the last couple of seasons before that. And
I don't want to. I know this is Locked On Coyotes, so I guess I could bring up a Coyotes point, but like it really depends on the Coyotes. It really depends on how serious Bill Armstrong and John Ferguson Jr., the new Coyotes assistant GM, who's the GM of the Roadrunners, are going to stick to what they both have said almost verbatim, almost to the point that it's a prepared statement by Armstrong that he's fed to Ferguson. And they have repeated it almost verbatim, saying basically, like, now I'm going to actually paraphrase it, but basically the gist is that they don't want to undercook these guys. They want to make sure that they are ready before they're coming up. You know, you two are a lot younger than me. So, you know, I think back to the days of when Gretzky was coaching the Coyotes and they brought Kyle Turris up, you know, this wonderkin who was supposed to do these great things, and he wasn't good. He was fine. You could tell he had talent, but he wasn't good. And what's he do? He goes and has a productive career with Nashville and Ottawa after leaving Phoenix or leaving Glendale, because they forced him into this situation because they were a bad franchise at the time with, you know, not good coaching, and it just sort of, they had to do that. And I think of that, and there's been other instances where guys, there's a half dozen I can think of where guys just got pushed up too soon. And I think if they stick to that, and injuries are going to play a role in that, it's going to benefit everybody. And selfishly, being in Tucson, and I'm not saying this as a fan, but as somebody who wants to cover interesting hockey, it's going to mean the Roadrunners are probably winning some games because they're in a better position with the way that these lineups shake out than the Coyotes obviously are with what they're trying to do for the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. The Coyotes franchise has been nothing if not rushed prospects. Going back my entire time writing about them, which is not the tourist season, but I think the season after.
Close to that, yeah.
I remember tourists sitting out for like the start of the year in the contract breakdown, and being so excited when we got David Rundblad. And man, that trade is one of my many bad hockey takes from back then, because did not turn out well for me.
Absolutely. Coming up, we still got more to get to on this show. We got to we're going to talk some of the returning players for the Arizona Coyotes. All that coming up on this episode of Locked On Coyotes. But first, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big businesses. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. I love how Shopify has the tools and resources that make it easy for any business to succeed, from down the street to around the globe. It's more than a store. Shopify grows with you. This possibility is powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/lockedonnhl. That's all lowercase for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Once again, go to shopify.com/lockedonnhl right now. Shopify.com/lockedonnhl.
All right, fans, fantasy hockey season is fast approaching, and I'm going to give you the inside track on the absolute best fantasy hockey platform in the industry. It's Fantrax. Fantrax's free NHL Fantasy Hockey League manager is the most customizable, easy to use, and feature-rich platform in the industry. This is where I host all of my fantasy leagues, and as the commissioner of some, I can tell you I'm never leaving Fantrax. Sign up today for a free special offer for Locked On Coyotes fans. You'll be entered to win an official NHL signed Nathan McKinnon jersey. Simply go to fantrax.com/lockedoncoyote or /lockedon and sign up today. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy hockey platform in the industry. Have you been hosting your season-long leagues on another platform? No problem. Fantrax can import all or any of your current leagues for free and customize if needed. Fantrax is the most customizable platform in the industry, offering you the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. If you've had any leagues on Yahoo or ESPN, migrate to Fantrax for a better experience. And again, sign up today for a free NHL signed Nathan McKinnon jersey. Simply go to fantrax.com/lockdown and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/lockdown. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports.
All right, back here on Locked On Coyotes, Robyn Leano and Carl Palick, joined by Brett Fera of the Arizona Daily Star as we discuss Tucson Roadrunners today. And I know we said we were going to talk about returning players, but I missed one player who is a new guy that I do kind of want to touch on. That's Janis Moser. The defense, another defense, and that just shows you how, like, we were talking about offense before, but defense too is also going to be incredibly deep this upcoming year.
Yeah, and it starts. I mean, Moser is going to be, I think, that one of the more interesting factors, I guess, for lack of a better word. I think in part because still pretty young, 21, but I don't think that there is a lot that folks who aren't totally ingrained with this organization know about Moser. And I think that's an interesting component. And I also think that it depends too how the team looks at the future of guys like Cam Crotty and even Cole Holtz, who, may not be a big time NHL prospect, but I think Moser is going to, especially with Soderstrom, if Soderstrom ends up back down here, that Moser is going to be looked at as sort of that 1B to Soderstrom very quickly. I know you have Dyson Mayo and Cam Dineen coming back, but I think part of that is wanting to see what Moser is able to actually build into. And I expect a lot out of Moser and a lot out of Soderstrom if he comes back too.
I mean, there's a reason they drafted him, right?
Yeah.
They needed someone to help bolster that defense, so they draft someone who's a little bit overage than you normally do in a draft. It's like, okay, we know what Moser's capable of because he's older, so there's more sample size. Let's take him, have him re-bolster Tucson, and go from there.
Yeah, Moser being drafted was definitely one of the more interesting picks by the Coyotes. They seem to go for a couple of older players, and it did kind of make me think at the time, or like, how much are they trying to bolster the Roadrunners, or how quickly do they need these guys developing, or how is that coming into play? And I wasn't too surprised to see him being sent down there, and I think he's going to potentially have a really good season.
Well, his sample size that anyone in North America would have seen. I mean, dude's played, I think, 7 seasons of international hockey. I mean, it's kind of a trip. I mean, I think since he was 14. So there is. I know I was saying earlier, there's not much, but it's all relative. I mean, the people who are in the know, who are watching international hockey and seeing what he's been able to do overseas, have seen him. But there isn't much prior to him getting drafted that folks over here who are just fans or in my position have seen, and I think that's what makes it intriguing. The Coyotes had to have seen something that I can't pick out of midair. So that's part of why I'm excited to see it. I know that seems a little superficial, but I think there's something absolutely there with him.
Absolutely. So that's the new players. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the returning players. And I think, well, why not start with the goaltending? Because Ivan Prospektov, back for his 3rd season now.
Yeah, he's a wily veteran now. I mean, geez, no, long gone are the days of him doing backflips after shutouts. And
I mean, you get older, you can't do backflips anymore. It's just it's how it goes with everyone.
He's 22, by the way. So
he's younger than all of us.
Yeah.
He is very young.
No, I look at the same, and this is probably the bigger issue with the depth on this team, is as much as David Tendek's been part of this organization for a while, as much as there's a couple of other goalies, but if I still expect to see a couple of things happen, and this is going to affect Prospektov, because Prospektov needs a full season as the number 1 down here. The reason that Adin Hill is going to be an NHL goaltender full time from here on out is because he got 3 or 4 full seasons as either the number 1 or the 1A in an AHL team, and a couple of those they played pretty well. And so with Hill out of the organization, Prospektov now is sort of that de facto number 3, even though he's arguably as good or better potentially. I mean, he's not necessarily today, but he's looked at as more important than the 1 and 2 today. It really depends on a couple things. One, how the rest of the roster moves around the league work this week, and if there's a good chance that they might be able to make a move, that the Coyotes might be able to make a move and pick up a goaltender. They'd have to keep him, but at the same time, I think there's something to that, sort of like the Eric Comrie pickup a couple of years ago, because the Coyotes still want to compete. I mean, we know that. That sounds obvious. They're tanking in the generalist sense of the word, but they have to field a team that doesn't allow the players they have up there to essentially give up. And at some point, they don't know yet what they have with the goalies that are up there. And I think the biggest issue, and forgive me for rambling about this, is whether or not Prospektov gets to stay in Tucson. If health or just pure need sends him up to Glendale too soon, the Roadrunners are going to be in trouble. I mean, and we don't know enough about Tendek to know if he's the guy down here, but it's Prospektov. It's his season. It's his team. They need it to be his season at his team. And I'm not talking about Tucson. I think the Coyotes do.
I don't think anyone at any point in the Coyotes organization is interested in rushing Prospektov. That seems like the
I hope not.
simplest move to make. Yeah, I mean, we say that now. Like, it seems like no one should be, but we've all seen plenty of organizations where they make that decision, and I really hope the Coyotes, keep Prospektov in the AHL for all of the season, or if not most, if there is like a brief injury call. But
And again, this is the year. I mean, this is the year of not rushing players, not rushing prospects, because the Coyotes are in that rebuild. Don't rush anything at this point. If Ivan Prospektov is the future goalie of your franchise, you want him to make sure he's ready and going to be complete, like 100% ready for the NHL. Have him season more in the American Hockey League. Be that number one guy in Tucson. Get that experience. And yeah, I'm totally with you guys on that. I think setting him up too early would not help him.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't think there's enough of a sample size out of Kozhinosh or Hutton or any of these guys to really know if they can play a full season up there, which is why I would have to guess Armstrong's eyes are on the waiver wires to see if there's somebody worth picking up. I mean, if this was 2 years ago, and again, I used Eric Comrie as the example. I think he's circled Winnipeg like 9 times in the last 5 years, but like, he's a guy, if that type of player comes available, that you grab and you make your number one almost overnight. I mean, maybe not, or maybe you're 1B up in Glendale, and that secures your ability to not have to do this with Prospektov, because they don't want to, and there's no benefit in doing it. The last couple of seasons, yeah, you had Hill and Prospektov do this because you were competing for playoff spots, but I don't know, and unless they're surprising everyone and in that mix, and even then it's risky. But I'm with you guys, and I think you know a lot more about this than I do, Carl. I'm going to start calling you Commissioner Carl after your last ad bump. You know a lot more than I do, Commish. So I'm going to go with your, knock on wood, with your belief that he's not coming out of Tucson all year. And I think that's good for him, and it's good for the organization.
Yeah. I mean, it would not surprise me at all if the Coyotes made an acquisition of another goalie. I don't think anyone is certain about Hutton being the starter. You're right. The team wants to have somewhat of a chance, and I'm not saying Hutton is terrible, but he's probably not an NHL starting goaltender by any stretch.
And neither is Kozhinosh.
And neither is Kozhinosh. So that'll be interesting.
Although one thing I will give is, yeah, neither of them are true starting goaltenders, but I mean, I'm not sure if that's what they're going for at this point. And we know this year, because different coaching, that I don't think either of them will be overused. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's moments, I think there's an opportunity at certain times to maybe you do bring Prospektov up for a weekend and plan to give him a start at a 2 out of 3 game start and then send him back, just to continue to let him pick up the speed. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him up there. It's just, if I were the Coyotes, and they're not going to do this for competitive reasons, but I would think it'd be pretty clear that, yeah, we're doing this just to continue to cycle guys through and see them. Because if I'm not mistaken, he doesn't have to clear waivers yet, right? They can move him up and down with no problem.
He is exempt from waivers, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he has not.
I mean, if he had to clear waivers, they wouldn't do that. But
no.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason why Aiden Hill had to stay in Glendale all of last year.
Well, it's the same problem with Kyle Capobianco right now. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are under this situation. Capobianco is kind of one of those guys that probably if it was any other year with any other set of players up in Glendale, might still be considered a person to have in Tucson, but they need him up there probably, and he'll get claimed in 5 minutes if he gets put on waivers. So
that's interesting for Capobianco because he's not sent down yet. I do really wonder where he is going to be. I almost think this is his make or break year, and see
it
if
has to be.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
One player that I'm kind of curious about, Yan Unique. He's gonna have a second season down in Tucson, right?
I mean,
Um,
I think I mentioned the joke of the Mighty Ducks joke of the Bash Brothers, from at least my childhood. Like I said, I'm older than you guys, but I think Unique is that partner to Imama down here. I mean, Unique's a very, very handsy goal scorer and playmaker, but also not huge. He's smaller than Barrett Hayton. People don't realize that, but while not huge, he plays big. So I think his year is about being physical and putting on a little bit of muscle and basically having some support from someone like Imama down here to be able to throw his weight around a little bit and gain the confidence physically to get ready for the NHL level.
And Brett, going on last year, I mean, that's one of the things that I asked to then head coach Steve Poppman. I was like, who's a player we should look out for? And he mentioned Jan Yannick and his physicality, and the weight and just the play style he is, being a true power forward in the game. And I mean, you said pairing him alongside Boko Imama. I'm like, oh my god, that'd be quite some
yeah, that'll be a heavy
group
line.
thing.
I finally got a chance to see Unique this preseason, and he looked a lot more physical than I had ever really thought. Because you read about these players all the time, but if you're not watching the game tape, you don't really get the full idea of what they're doing. And Unique throws his body around, and I love it, and I want to see more of it in the future. But I do think he's probably going to be spending the full season in Tucson this year. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, I think the same thing. I think you'll see a lot of these guys get a tour when the schedule works out that way. These guys that have the ability to go up and down, and I think Unique is one of those. We talked about it with Prospektov. Probably it's different with goalies, so I mean, maybe it won't happen with Prospektov, but I would see Unique getting another weekend or two, especially toward the end of the NHL season, like he did this past year. Soderstrom, if they do send him down, I'm not totally certain it's going to happen, but I think at some point Soderstrom will be down here. But yeah, I think Unique's year is here. And I also, I mean, it as weird as this sounds, and I'm totally coming out of nowhere, and I don't have the knowledge that you guys have about the Coyotes, but I personally think Unique is a more intriguing prospect than even Hayton, just because he is a 5-tool player. And I think that is something that a franchise like the Coyotes, which are going to load up on young guys next season and the year after, are going to need to build around. And so I'm excited to see him take that sort of jump, which he took in the second half of last season too. I mean, he started slow. I mean, all the young guys started really slow. Soderstrom kind of picked it up, and obviously on the defense, he's not going to score as much. But then Unique just hit this second level, and that's where you saw the difference between him and Hayton, because Hayton never kicked into that second or I guess third gear, even though you can see the skill every night. So yeah, I think Unique's going to be here all year, and I also think we talked about it earlier. That depth is going to help him a lot. He was playing on the number one line a lot last year, and he may not have to. They might be able to create a line of a a Cocconi, a Hudson Fasching, and insert other player here, and let Unique sort of dominate from a second position, and I think that's good for him at his age.
Yannick is a second line center. I love hearing that. I think that would work perfectly.
Yeah, he's definitely like, I know he has seen his like prospects grow like since being drafted by the Coyotes. It definitely reminds me of Christian Dvorak over Dylan Strome, where just after a time you're like, the guy in the second round seems like they're doing better, and that's always kind of interesting when that goes.
Maybe it's because they try harder too, because like the first rounders might be a little bit, in their head, they got drafted in the first round, they have a higher chance of making it. Second rounders know the second, third rounders, fourth rounders, they know if they work 5 times as hard.
Yeah, I mean, it could be there. I do always say that being a first round pick sometimes seems like a double edged sword, because I mean, we saw it with Dylan Strome. Like, the expectation is there, and if you're not living up, you look a lot worse than someone who's like over exceeding from what you would expect from them.
I mean, you could say that about a lot of these guys if you look at the Ben McCartneys and, Ryan McGregor. I want to ask you all about, I know we're talking about the Roadrunners, but I want to know what they're seeing in McGregor that's holding him up there so long. Because I can't fathom he's on the NHL roster a couple of days from now, but they've given him a long look, and he was very, very important to this team. But he played half the year on the fourth line in Tucson last year, and now he's at camp for 3 weeks. I mean, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. But he's one of those guys like you're talking about that doesn't have the pressure of being a first round pick. And yes, he's on to his second team, but that's kind of where even Liam Kirk fits into the mold of being a relatively later round pick.
I'm interested to see. I'm personally also pretty surprised that McGregor stayed up as long as he has. Maybe they're
Am I
looking
missing something? Forgive me for interrupting. Am I missing? Is he hurt? I mean, like, I haven't gotten to see a lot of action up there, but is he still, or is it a legitimate like hockey related reason? I know that sounds like dumb, and I should know that, and I'm sharing my ignorance on our show here tonight. But I'm curious if either of you know that.
I do not think he is hurt.
I didn't either. And I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot either.
Although
I just started thinking about it, and
now that you think about it, I'm thinking about it too. Like, have we seen him any of the preseason games?
Oh nope, he is out upper body injury.
There we go.
He's been out the whole time.
Then
that's it. Then that's it right there, because they're not gonna send him down until he's healthy. I mean,
Yeah.
or at least through the first. Okay, so that makes sense. I feel stupid now and it's just, I'll be honest, I haven't been able to watch every ounce of the actual preseason games, and there's not much I can do from 150 miles away of seeing anything that's going on at practice. But yeah, I missed that one.
Trust me, we have complained about the preseason games being very difficult to watch a couple of times. So
we've only watched officially 2 of them. I mean, you a little bit more, Carl, because you were at the one last Saturday. But
yeah,
the 2 that were streaming, one terrible one that was unwatchable in Anaheim. Like, it was, I don't even know what to call that. And then you have the Hockeyville game, which was cool, but then you couldn't really it took a few steps to try to watch it.
Yeah, last night's game was on ESPN Plus, so I got a chance to watch part of that. It's interesting watching the Coyotes' presentation improve during preseason. Like, you'd expect, like, that would be somewhat well done, but it's preseason for everybody, including production.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at some of these other returning players. And one that I want to mention, Brett, that you and I got a chance to watch last year is Michael Cocconi. You kind of mentioned his name at the beginning. Last year, he was on the Roadrunners, but not as an Arizona Coyotes prospect. He was a prospect of the Nashville Predators, but by coincidence, because the Milwaukee Admirals decided not to play last year, they sent him to Tucson, and now he's actually a Coyotes prospect.
Well, it's really interesting because it's not even just because of the Admirals, even though that's the big reason. The Nashville sent most of their minor league or AAA level guys, their AHL level guys, to Chicago, I believe, to play with the Wolves as sort of the share, sort of like what Seattle's doing with Charlotte this year.
Yeah.
And he was one of, I think, 3 that they sent elsewhere because they didn't really value him to be in that situation where they had to watch him every day. Like, he was under contract. They needed him to play, but there were a couple things at play. Like, there was a Nashville scout at every home game sitting right in front of us in our little corner on the elevated seats. We could see his backpack and his jacket. And then he outplayed everyone's expectations on a bad team. And I know that's kind of, for those in Tucson, Robyn, you're gonna understand this. It's the TJ McConnell effect. TJ McConnell was the point guard for U of A basketball, 8 years ago, who's now in his 7th NBA season or 6th NBA season, was never considered an NBA prospect, but ended up going to the Philadelphia 76ers when they were really bad and earning minutes as a hustle guy. One of those guys that isn't putting any stats up, but you just like watching him play. And now I think he signed a $40 million deal, returning to Indiana. It's his 2nd team he's been on this offseason because he just has that. But the teams he's on aren't highly competitive usually. So I'm waiting to see what Cocconi can do when he's not the centerpiece of a bad team, picking up garbage, but he's in the middle of a lot of really good players and can benefit maybe from, or if he can keep up playing alongside these guys who are young and fast and, can do all these things. His situation's so interesting. He was 8 days, I think 8 days before the first regular season game back in January. I mean, it started in February, but it was January, was the day he learned about getting sent to Tucson. And next thing you know, he leads the team in goals. He's top 10 in the league in goal scoring, sets the all-time franchise record for goals in a game with 4, has 6 in one weekend. He's an interesting case. And we joked about it that, hey, it's probably the last time we're ever going to see him, in that last game, because he wasn't part of the organization. And sure enough, they saw enough to want to keep him around. So I think that's huge, and you pair him alongside Hudson Fasching, who's the oldest player on the team now at 26. I don't consider Fasching an old player, but or been around, in his for how long he's been playing. And then Dyson Mayo on the defensive side is, I think, 10 games away from passing Michael Bunting for most games all time played by a Roadrunner. So you have some seniority here. You have some depth of guys that can lead through their experience of being 3 or 4 years older, but also having a significant amount of game and experience under their belt. And I mean, it was really funny. Monday at practice, I asked Cam Deneen, about being, he's in his 4th year with the Roadrunners. I asked him about being one of the older guys or one of the veterans. I didn't say older. And then he turns and he goes, yeah, well, us old guys, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, wait a minute, you're 23. But he's right. He's been there 4 years and he's now one of the grizzled vets and, is no longer a baby face, turning the puck over on the blue line. He's considered one of the stalwarts back there. So I think in all those cases, particularly Cocconi's, it's going to be really interesting to see how they play around that level of that number of prospects. And, Cocconi was a newcomer with Unique and with Soderstrom and with Hayton last year. So he's got a little bit of a rapport with some of those younger guys already. So I think it was a smart move and a relatively inexpensive move for the Coyotes to make.
Yeah, I looked it up. The Ottawa Senators were also involved in that Cocconi situation that led to him being on the Tucson Roadrunners.
Yeah, they basically dumped him to Nashville, and Nashville's like, well, we don't know what to do with him, so here.
Yeah, I was like looking that up because the end story was like, all right, this is the guy leading the Roadrunners. What's going on with him? And it's like, I don't know how to make sense of any of this. I assume COVID was involved somehow that led to this crazy acquisition, but not really. That was fun.
I think the interesting thing with him that Robyn, you and I saw is that I mentioned 6 goals in one weekend. He had 15 on the season. So yes, he was a top 10 goal scorer in the league, but can he do it and not necessarily in bunches, but will he need to? Depending how this team shakes out, he may not need to, but to have some of those moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially since we saw how deep. I mean, when we were talking about the overall depth of this Roadrunners is, seeing, especially of all the new guys coming in, I mean, he won't need to, which is a good thing. But it's good to have his talent.
It's going to be interesting to see Blake Spears too. He was basically out almost all last season. I think he got hurt the second weekend of the season. I mean, granted, it was the shortened season that started in February, but he's probably the 12th guy on this offensive unit and still worth having. He was part of the Nick Merkley, I call it the Nick Merkley trade, but the Taylor Hall trade, 2 seasons ago. So he came over from New Jersey and he's a legit guy that's a big locker room presence. He has been for a couple of years already, and even through injury last year. So there's a good, for all the newcomers we talked about, if you take out of the fact that all the younger guys, put them onto one side, then you have all the returning guys like Spears and Cocconi and the defensive guys we talked about and Fasching. And then you add sort of the X factor of a Boko Imama in the middle, who's mature and experienced at 25 years old, but still a newcomer to this team. I think it's a pretty cool marriage, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think the one, we talked about it already, but the most important newcomer who's also a returner is probably Jay Verity, the head coach. I mean, I think he, as good of a coach as he is, and he's already proven at multiple levels now, even if he was just an average coach, it's a huge advantage over last season that they now have 3 legitimate full-time coaches on this staff. I mean, if you're talking about position groups and breaking up your special teams and things like that, they only had 2 on-ice coaches last year.
Yeah.
they kind of just rolled with that. And a brand new head coach. I mean, Steve Poppman deserves a medal for what he did last year, even though they were the last place team in the division, because he held it together with duct tape and silly string, and so Verity comes in and comes back to a situation where the last time he was on the ice, they were in first place with a better roster than he had that night. I think that's a pretty telling component. And the fact that there was, other than Phil Housley, a pretty large cleaning house up in Glendale. And yet Bill Armstrong says, no, I want to keep, and keep is a relative term because Verity's coming back, but I want to keep Verity and John Slaney and Steve Potvin together in Tucson. That's a pretty strong sign of confidence from the the C-suite in Glendale.
Absolutely. We still got more to get to on this show. We're going to talk about the overall expectations. You kind of mentioned a little bit of that to talk about what to expect from the Tucson Roadrunners for the 2021-2022 AHL season. That coming up in just a sec. But first, I want to tell you guys about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar in the land. Did you know that Built Bar has so many delicious flavors? There is something for everyone. When you talk to a Built Bar fan, they are definitely passionate about their favorites. If you don't know all the flavors, they got a lot of different ones. You're missing out. From raspberry to mint brownie, salted caramel, orange, cookies and cream, and more. One of my favorite ones was the limited time flavor from earlier this year, Churro Puff. It was probably just super soft, super delicious, and it's absolutely to die for. If you haven't tried all the flavors, you can get a mix box. You get 2 of each of the 9 regular flavors, and if you decide you like one of the best, you can get a full box of that down the road. If not only are these the best tasting out there, they are also healthy too. Here are some of the health information you want to know about. 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to 180, only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams net carbs. Amazing flavor, all tasty, all healthy. And if you guys go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your order. Once again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back on for another football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget to use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From football, basketball, boxing to hockey, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, back here on Locked On Coyotes. Once again, Robyn, Leano, and Carl Palick, Brett Fera of the Arizona Daily Star joining us on today's show to talk Tucson Roadrunners. Before we get any further, I want to go ahead and thank everyone for making Locked On Coyotes your first listen of the day. Really appreciate all your support. To those who don't, I want to let you guys know we are free and available on all platforms, so you can listen to us anywhere you are. Let's go ahead now and discuss the upcoming season. So, and Brett, this is going to be interesting, a really fun conversation because pre-COVID, this team was en route for a historically really good season. They were ended up being Pacific Division champions because of the way it ended, but they could have made a Calder Cup push. And then last year, COVID season, not as good as you said. Steve Potvin essentially had to have a team pieced together by silly string, is the way you said it, and it was definitely a stark contrast. But now we're back to a season where we have a lot of that depth back. We have those returning players. We have the new players, like we mentioned, and this is going to be an exciting year.
It's going to be really exciting, and not just for the Roadrunners, but league wide. I mean, you have, the last Calder Cup champion that was crowned was Charlotte, and they're probably the deepest team in the league because of the fortuitous nature of their affiliation agreements and basically getting everyone that Seattle wants to push down there, because the Palm Desert franchise isn't in place yet, which will be next year. They'll be Seattle's AHL affiliate. So you have Charlotte back, who didn't play last year. You have Milwaukee, who didn't play last year, who probably was the favorite, even though the Roadrunners were right behind them. Milwaukee was probably the favorite to go into the playoffs and win the Calder Cup in 2020. They didn't play last year. So you have the two, the 2019 champion and the 2020 likely champion and no cup winner last year, both returning. And the fact that the Roadrunners are back in a 9-team division, which I just think is absurd. And it's almost 10 teams because they play Texas again to open the season and then go on the road to see them again. And that's a team they've played, I think, 3 years in a row now, just because Texas is they're the Coyotes of the AHL, kind of on an island without any teams in their real region. So they sort of get stuck, playing against all these other places that aren't really geographically connected. But so I think it's going to be pretty fascinating. I think with 9 teams in this division, it's going to be really, really interesting. You've got Henderson, who was kind of the class of the division last year. Stockton's back after playing a year in Calgary because of the border situation. They chose to keep the team up there, even though Edmonton did not do the same with Bakersfield. Bakersfield didn't play.
No,
Or do I have
Bakersfield
that
did
back?
play.
Bakersfield did play. Sorry. The Roadrunners did not play Bakersfield. That's what it was.
Yeah.
They didn't even play a team in their own division. That's how crazy last season was. And they're in Colorado, San Jose, Ontario, San Diego. I mean, it's a deep, deep group. And then Abbotsford, the Roadrunners are going to make their first trip north of the border since their inaugural season. They have not played in Canada since April of 2016, and they will on, I think, December 22nd and 23rd. They'll play Abbotsford, which is an hour east of Vancouver. So it's going to be interesting, but I think we're a month away from being able to really prognosticate anything just because of how few games these teams all played last year. So there's no real takeaway of, oh, well, this team was great a year ago. Yeah, you had Providence, who's always pretty competitive, was really good. You had Laval was competitive, and obviously that makes sense. You either have one of two things happen. You rarely see an NHL team that's great and an AHL team that's bad. You sometimes see an NHL team that's good and an AHL team that's good. Laval and Montreal are a good comparison of that this past season. Or you do sometimes often see an NHL team that's not that great and an AHL team that's good. And that's essentially what the Roadrunners would be trying to do this year with what's going on up in Glendale. And so, I mean, I don't want to not prognosticate. I think the Roadrunners are going to be good. I mean, that's vague and simple, but I think it's the truth. I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be competitive, and I think they're going to be able to withstand issues to depth that they haven't in past years with injuries and things like that, as long as goaltending stays intact with Prospektov. Other than that, I think we need to wait a week or two after the season starts to really see how some of these teams play, because there was a lot of movement between the end of 2020 and now. And I kind of think you have to throw out the 30-game 2021 season as just doesn't tell you much about what these teams are going to do this year.
I mean, that's kind of why we threw out the it was hard to talk about the draft, because we're just like, wait, for example, we're talking about Dylan Gunther, when they drafted him, it's like he only played 12 games. There's not much of a sample size. It's the same case with the AHL. Like, they only played 40 games. Like, what?
Yeah, like the NHL, it was only division games. So how can you really compare against like the season like this? And I thought it was difficult following NHL hockey. What you're talking about with the AHL and just the teams that didn't play last year.
Yeah.
How can you predict what they're going to be? I'm glad it's not my job to be the one making these roster decisions for fielding a team against guys.
Well, it's just you also, I mean, it's completely realigned. I know this happened in the NHL too, but like the AHL basically said, let's blow up our divisions and we'll take the 4 Canadian teams and Stockton, because Stockton technically played out of Calgary, and make a Canadian division. And so you had just everything was out of whack. And I think it's amazing, though. We're looking at, and this is not really talking about this year, but we have a 9-team Pacific Division. So there's 32 teams in the AHL. 9 of them are in one division. Next year, there will be 33 teams. And unless a team moves, and there's possibility Stockton moves, and there's rumors that they may move to like a Colorado Springs area where they've got an old barn that Colorado. I always get mixed up who plays there other than Air Force. Colorado College? Who is it I'm thinking of? Anyway, one of the universities, the D1 schools, just built a brand new arena. And so they've got a building that's 20 years old in downtown that's barely touched. So there's talk of Stockton moving there. And then you would take Colorado Eagles and that team and move them to the Central to have an 8-team Pacific Division. But the point is, if they don't do that, the Pacific Division will be 10 teams next year, with the Palm Desert team coming on board. And I keep getting nervous for no reason other than just I want to see them play the teams out west, that they're going to come up with some kooky way to parallel them with what the Coyotes are having to do and move them. You're going to have 4 teams within 500 driving miles potentially of Tucson, and yet there's a possibility they may be the team left out and shoveled to the Central Division, because I can't imagine there's a 10 team division next year. So it's going to be interesting enough with 9, and I think how that goes, and if the Pacific becomes a dominant division, it's a double-edged sword. If they become a dominant division this year and a deep division, that's good, except that the rest of the league might push to break them up. And if they're mediocre, the rest of the league might sit there and say, yeah, they're dragging us down. So I think it's going to be interesting how it shapes out, and whether or not the rest of the league is okay with this many teams in one place, and whether the NHL interests align with that. All of these teams out west have their NHL clubs in relatively close geography, other than the 2 Canadian teams, Edmonton and Calgary. Everyone else is within very, very close geography. I mean, interestingly enough, the Roadrunners are the furthest team from their NHL partner, other than Edmonton and Calgary, of the 9 teams in the Pacific Division. So, which is not that far. So I think it's going to be a really interesting and important season out west to really see what happens. And it could be one that ends with, everyone I talk to says the Roadrunners aren't moving next year, but I think 10 teams is too much in one division. You got to break that up somehow.
It's hard to make that decision though, because I mean, we're in the American Hockey League, we're talking about travel, that like travel is a huge problem because you need money. And like you said, if they're in striking distance from Henderson, from Palm Desert, from San Diego, from Ontario, like that group, those 5 teams already, like that's really
5 teams within 500 miles. I mean, it's crazy. You and I talked about this, Robyn, last year, how at the point that Henderson came on board, because they're playing in Vegas on the Strip, they immediately became the closest geographical opponent to the Roadrunners. At this point next season, even though they're only moving 15 miles to their new arena in Henderson, they'll be the 3rd closest opponent to the Roadrunners, because San Diego is back in their own building. Palm Desert will be closer. So, I mean, I agree with your point. Like, I can't see, unless you break the division into 2 5-team mini divisions. So you end up having 5 teams in the league, or 5 divisions in the league. And these 10 teams sort of play like a college division, like, a Pac-12 North and Pac-12 South, or SEC West and East, and then battle it out to see who out of those teams wins the division and gets in. I don't know, but the playoff situation is going to be interesting too. I think 9 teams, the top 7 go to that mini tournament again. They're doing it again this year. I think they're the only division that's doing it again. So it's kind of a trip, and it's kind of unfair in some respects. The top 4 teams historically have gone, and the Roadrunners have been right there a couple of times in that mix. And so I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I will say though, throwing back to I guess this is a hockey platform, so I have to, do the Locked On fans know about your love for the Sharks, Robyn? I'm imagining they
Yes, they do. I've talked about it.
It's come up a couple times.
So your other favorite team in sports, the first place San Francisco Giants. What did they do, 10 years ago or 7-8 years ago when they won their 3 titles? They won a title, then they were kind of mediocre. Then they won a title, then they were kind of mediocre.
Yep.
Then they won a title. Well, to look at the 5 years so far of the Roadrunners. First year started hot, finished 6th, 2 spots out of a playoff spot. The next year won the division and the conference regular season point championship, if you can call it that.
And so the second round too.
Won the second round of the playoffs. The year after that, finished basically 1 point out of a playoff spot. So another mediocre season. The year after that, won the division. The year after that, finished dead last. So if everything goes to plan like your Giants, then this is the year the Roadrunners win again. So, forget what's on the ice. We're just going to go with karma and history and just, tell the calendar that's what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, I won't complain.
That seems fair enough. I've seen less strange explanations for why things happen in sports.
There's no explanation. It's just it's just grasping at straws sometimes. Preseason coverage makes no sense because no one's done anything yet.
No. It is crazy just to see the growth of the AHL in the Southwest area. Looking at all of the movement, I remember everyone just complaining about the Coyotes having to get their prospects from
Springfield.
Springfield. It was nice when
It was
we had
San
San
Antonio for a
Antonio.
while. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
considered close.
yeah.
And
And then it was
I think what was even crazier that I was thinking about that too is when they were talking about moving Utica before they decided to move it to Abbotsford. You know what one of the discussion was where they wanted to put it.
Prescott
Speaking of
Valley, right?
Prescott Valley in the
Yeah.
Southwest, that would have been added another Southwest team. That would have been
how soon was that in relation to the Sundogs leaving?
No, this was just this
Or
past year.
this was just last year.
oh
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
one of the
oh
3 or
yeah, no,
4,
I
and
do
part of
remember
it's
that.
because I mean, that's what's so interesting. Bob Hoffman, the president of the Roadrunners, used to be a bigwig. I can't remember his exact title, but was a higher up with the CHL, the old Central Hockey League, which it had a really interesting business model. That's what the Sundogs played in. So the Sundogs, the Colorado Eagles played there. They were in the ECHL, but the CHL was where they really started before moving up to the AHL 3 seasons ago. Was it, Robyn? I think when we first saw them join the Pacific Division. And
yeah.
the CHL was a construction company. Their whole MO was, we are going to go to your city. We are going to build you an arena. And oh, by the way, here's a hockey team, because they ran the league as an offshoot to justify building arenas. And I'm not putting that on Bob's shoulders. I mean, I just know that Bob worked for the CHL. They were ironically, I think their headquarters was for the last 3 or 4 years, or maybe longer that they existed, was at Westgate in Glendale. They had an office in Westgate up above the Jimmy Buffett restaurant. And so it was kind of fascinating. So that's why there's a brand new, I mean, it's 10 years old, but there's an arena in Prescott that's great and ready for a minor league hockey team of some sort. But they're just, that's why it would be interesting to see if there was any value in putting an ECHL franchise back there. And now you have 100 miles each, or 120 miles each direction. If and when, I don't want to say if, but if and when the Coyotes truly solidify with an arena in Tempe, or God forbid Tempe, do you do that? Do you try and pull that off? And now you have all your teams in this striking distance to just continue to move up and down. But I don't see the second team happening, but at the same time, it'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, I do remember. Who is it? Schlemko
Yep.
came up from the CHL, and that always really impressed me. That story of just a guy going from the CHL to the
Yep.
AHL to the NHL. You very rarely see that for defense.
It is a rare pipeline to see. I mean,
Yeah.
it happens for goaltending, because goaltending, that goes pretty deep, but rarely do you see a skater make that jump.
Yeah, because goaltending, there's 2 spots everywhere essentially, so like you end up going that deep. But yeah, for skaters,
I mean, it's pretty fascinating. I mean, there's some recent Roadrunner goaltenders who have done it. Hunter Miska did it. I mean, he played in the ECHL as recent as, I think, 2 seasons ago, and he's also got NHL games that bookended that season. And Steve Poppman is the interesting one to me, the former, or I guess current Roadrunners assistant coach, who was the head coach last year. His only professional season, I guess not only his last professional season was with the Sundogs back in 2010. And he was actually pretty good for them after, I think, like a decade plus playing overseas. He played some AHL hockey. I forgot about that. But yeah, it's the Sundogs were fun. I mean, they were an interesting team. I think they beat Colorado. They had a big rivalry with the Colorado Eagles, which is kind of fun that's sort of considered the Roadrunners' natural rival, even though there's a lot of teams closer. That's the team that they make them play the most every year. And so it's the Arizona minor league team still going at Colorado, which I guess makes sense. Arizona and Colorado always are kind of considered to be, distant cousins, I guess, in everything we do.
They are kind of similar, but very different. It's very interesting.
Absolutely. So, in trying to get these closing thoughts over, I mean, we're talking about this upcoming season. Like you were said, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly how it's going to go. But like, let's say maybe a player you're looking forward to the most. Like, for example, for me, and I mean, it's no surprise that I've been telling this to Carl, I really want to see Liam Kirk. I'm trying to get my hands on the Liam Kirk Kachina jersey, because I want to see the 7th round kid from the UK just all of a sudden do incredibly well.
Yeah, I think Kirk's going to be interesting just because of a lot of the talk over the summer about his contract and whether he actually would end up here. I think that's kind of cool that worked out and is out of the way. I mean, Mine is kind of a weird one, and it's only because we got 4 games to see him last year, but it's Ben McCartney. I like seeing a, these late round. I mean, the 7th round pick last year, and ends up getting a quick tryout with the Roadrunners, get some relatively upper line time, and I think 4 assists and a goal in 4 games. After not great, but pretty good numbers over 4.5 seasons in the WHL. So I think there are guys like that are the potential Connor Garlands of this team, that we're going to see the prospects do what the prospects do. But I think it'd be fun to see. You mentioned Kirk as a late round pick. Like, it'd be fun to see these guys really build after 1 or 2 years into what Garland was able to do as a relatively not unheralded, because he was a prospect, but he wasn't, with his size and everything, he wasn't expected to necessarily grow into what he became, but he had the tenacity to do it. And so I'd like to see if some of these other guys pull that off.
Yeah. And I do think McCartney looked pretty good in the preseason action I saw him. I'm going to go Yen Unique. I think he has the most upside. I'm very curious to get a chance to hopefully get a better look at him.
I heard someone describe him with 2 words, and I was like, it's kind of great. And they said Charles Barkley, and I'm like, what? And then I thought about it, and they're just like, he is a power forward. He is going to bully you around, and then he's going to have the finesse to throw the ball in your face, or in this case, put the puck behind you. And I like that. I like that description a lot.
Yeah, but that you put it that way, I'm like, oh, like that does that does match up perfectly with the kind of player he is, and that's pretty exciting.
And that's something that the team definitely needs.
Oh yeah, not to mention Jan Yannick's a center.
Yeah.
We've been talking about centers on this podcast for a long time. The Coyotes don't have enough of them.
Yeah, all of the centers are gone. What happened to the centers? The Coyotes were supposed to have centers.
The Roadrunners have a lot. I mean, that's the funny part. Even a Cocconi and Hudson Fashion can play a little bit of center too. So I think the Roadrunners are pretty deep, but not necessarily from a prospect standpoint, other than Unique and I see Kirk being listed as a center. Is that going to hold, you think?
I'm not sure. I don't remember where Team Great Britain played him.
I
don't know either.
I think he was center. If anything, I think either moved between center and, I believe, right wing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then Hayton is going to be an interesting one too, where he kind of shakes out. Can I ask one last question? I know we're running out of time, but do you guys see Hayton coming out of Tucson, or you think they're going to keep him up there?
I think they're going to send him down to Tucson.
Yeah, I think he's going to send him 1 more year in Tucson. There's no reason to have him up there. There's a reason why the Coyotes brought in, the veterans like Liam O'Brien and Travis Boyd, so you don't have to have Hayton up, and so you don't have to rush his development.
Yeah. I almost think like the reason he's still here, because we saw Dylan Gunther get reassigned like right away, is just because he's hurt right now. I think if he wasn't, he'd probably already be in Tucson.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's very much likely. But I think that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Coyotes. Once again, thanks for Carl for joining us like he usually does. Thanks to Brett Fera of the Arizona Daily Star for joining us today's episode. Brett, as we close things off, I always like to let the guests have people know where to find you, because obviously you're the main guy who covers the Tucson Roadrunners. I mean, it's you and me, but
you can find me on Twitter at ChurroPuff. No, I'm kidding. That's gonna be my new handle, because I like the name of the Built Bar you were plugging in the last break. So you see, I'm a good guest. I come in and I plug your sponsors. So at Brett Fera, BRETTFERA, and at Tucson.com, or if you are in Southern Arizona, you can still subscribe to the print newspaper, amazingly, of the Arizona Daily Star, and it's well worth the price. So thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. Before you go, thank you both for having me. I appreciate it. And as Robyn knows, we've known each other a long time. I talk a lot, so thank you for letting me make this a long episode.
Well, yeah, it was fun. Absolutely. It was absolutely great episode. Anyways, thanks again to Brett. Thanks to Carl. Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed what you heard. If you did, don't forget to leave a review, leave a like, leave a comment. We are available everywhere you get your podcast. Subscribe if you get to already. Find us on YouTube now. We have a YouTube channel. Subscribe there as well. Also, don't forget to interact with us on social media. I'm personally at Robbie101. Carl Pavlik is at Carl Pavlik FFH. We are at LO_Coyotes. Interact with us. Ask us a question. And we will answer right back. If we don't, we might be saving it for a future episode of the Locked On Coyotes podcast. Again, that's going to do it for today's episode. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Hope you guys are staying healthy. And don't forget to howl on.